want me to start? Okay.
That's pretty narrow. It didn't take you 50 years. Oh, do you? Oh, that's cool. No, I'm not going to. That's why I was just looking for your film names. Here we go. Roadmap, Jerusalem, Roadmap. Yeah. No, I'm just going to make you scream. Just make sure it's on.
All right, Erev Tov, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me okay? It's so nice to be back here. This is our second evening in our 21st Century Judaism series. Many of you joined us last week for Rabbi Danny Schiff talking about Judaism in the digital age. And next week, we're going to be joined with Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. But tonight, I'm so delighted to introduce Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz, who was a classmate of mine in rabbinical school. So we were just catching up a little bit. It's just really nice. We were kind of like the second career people.
We were both despised in our class.
Yeah. Everyone else was like straight out of college.
Trying to figure out
life. The girlfriends, the everything. And Nolan and I were like real adults. And so we kind of bonded. Over that. He is now the senior rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom, which is an enormous conservative synagogue that's thriving in Encino in the LA area. And he's now into his fourth year in that position. Before that, he was at Adat Shalom, another synagogue that is in the LA area. And he's really so many different things. He's a senior rabbi. He's also a scholar. He has a Ph.D. from Claremont in religion, specifically the Hebrew Bible. And he's also really involved in a lot of things related to Israel. He's, the chair? I have it here. He's on the executive board of the Zionist Rabbinic Coalition. He serves on the national board of Merkaz. He was just in Israel as a delegate in the World Zionist Conference. So that's one of the hats he wears. Another hat he wears is that he's actually a filmmaker. And hence the second career. Before Nolan came to Ziegler, he was an accomplished person in the film industry, but actually his Judaism and Jewish leadership overlap with his filmmaking. He has directed 2 documentaries, which are really worth checking out. The Roadmap Jerusalem in 2018 and Roadmap Genesis, really wonderful, thought-provoking films that are at that intersection of film and Judaism. And so we'll talk to him about that, a little bit of his background, and also his new book, The Case for Dual Loyalty, which came out, about a year ago now? January. Oh, yeah. So really recent, very thought-provoking. We will have some of those for sale if you are interested, and if we run out, they're available anywhere that you might find a Jewish book. So that's a lovely opportunity to read his book, The Case for Dual Loyalty, and we'll speak about that tonight. I want to say a few thank yous before I let him get a word in or two. Or 3 or 4 or a lot more. I want to thank Rick and Linda Mishkin. I want to thank Dorothy Kahn-Resnick. Is Dorothy here tonight? There she is. I want to thank Howard Saft and Whitney Pash. Are they here tonight? I'm not sure if they made it tonight. And I want to thank Bill and Lynn Geller all for sponsoring this series. Let's give them a big round of applause. It's because of your support that we've been able to do this series and other series like this where we bring in wonderful different scholars to expose us to new ideas and perspectives as we are in this 21st unique century of Judaism. So with that, please give a warm welcome to Rabbi Dr. Nolan Lebovitz.
I have to start out. Is this on?
It is on, but not very. Here, why don't you use mine? Because my voice is obnoxious.
Is yours better? Is this better? I think it's the same. I think they're both. I have to start out by saying hi to Sherry, and also I have to say hello to a family that I don't know the faces, but one of my favorite families from VBS, the Hochstead family. I don't know if they're here in person. If they're not here, okay. If they're not here, please relay my warm wishes to the family. And it's nice that there's such overlap. And also, I want to begin by not only thanking you for inviting me here, but congratulating you for having the seichel for hiring one of the most talented rabbis in the United States of America, Rabbi Sarah Schulman. And so, it goes without saying that there should be hakarat hatov. When people do something great, they should get the credit for doing something great. You've done something great. Now we're going to talk about how much trouble the American Jewish community is in, but not you. You've done something great. Okay.
Thank you so much. Let's begin by understanding a little bit more about who you are and where you're coming from.
I feel like I should lay down for this.
So you're the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors, which is very significant. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what were really the pivotal, most influencing, memories or aspects of your life growing up that have really led you to your own Jewish perspectives.
Every kid grows up in a house and thinks that their childhood is completely normal, right? Everybody understands that? So I grew up in a house where on Friday nights, on Shabbos, or on Sunday nights, Sunday night was really the night that my grandparents would always come over, and we'd have dinner together, and then they'd watch 60 Minutes, and I would force myself to watch 60 Minutes, because if I was with them, that meant I didn't have to do homework. But being with my grandparents, we took vacations together. We went heaven for my grandparents was the Catskill Mountains. It was the Concord Resort Hotel. I'm not sure I've been there, but you could eat just gluttonous portions of food, all kosher, and people spoke English, Yiddish, and people spoke a language that was only spoken really in our homes, which was Yiddish, which was this strange combination of the two languages. And they would tell stories. My grandparents spoke openly about so-and-so who survived the Nazis by jumping in the well, or so-and-so's younger sister. It's terrible. She was murdered at such a young age. It's amazing that they have any sense about them at this stage of life. Those were the kinds of things that we grew up with. And I was amazed as I grew up to find out that not everybody's grandparents had accents. Not everybody's grandparents had these experiences that they came for. I remember my closest friend growing up at Salomon Schechter in Chicago, when I was over at his house for dinner, and I asked his grandfather where he was from, and he said Chicago. I was like, no, I know you're from Chicago, but where in Europe are you from? And he's like, I was born in Chicago. And it was like, I couldn't believe it. So the very notion that people grew up in families that were different than mine was confounding. Eventually I adapted and figured it out. I became a little bit smarter, but there's no doubt that informed kind of our moral compass, our Jewish compass, and our Israel compass. So just to give you a sense of how it informed me, my Hebrew name, and I talk a little bit about it, I talk a lot about my name in the book. My Hebrew name is Natan, named after my mother's father, Papa Nathan, who I talk about in the book. Of course, my English name is not Nathan because my dad grew up in elementary school with a Nathan that he couldn't stand. So Nolan was the English name that was given, and then my middle name was to be named after my grandfather, Simon Ba Lebovitz, his older brother. His older brother was this great big strong guy, and when they didn't see Nazis for a long time into the war, right? So my father's side is from the Carpathian Mountains of Czechoslovakia, that then became the Carpathian Mountains of Slovakia, and is now the Carpathian Mountains of Ukraine. It's an area called Chist, is where they're from. And there's a town there called Lebovitz, which is what I found out when I did research at the Diaspora Museum that's now called the Anu Museum. But I was so excited to find out that we were named after the town because it reminded me of the Corleone family and The Godfather. So Hirsch, his oldest brother, who was this great big strong guy, there was one Nazi that came to the town, and he gave a uniform to a local person in the village, and then he left. And this local person in the village need not even really recruit other Nazis. The town village people, in this wonderful, idyllic atmosphere in which they grew up in the forest of the Carpathian Mountains, he rounded up everybody in the village to see that he brought out Hirsch into the middle of the square and shot him in the head in front of everyone to show them that resistance was futile. You could be the biggest, strongest, you could hold the greatest conviction for the village, and there would be no. So I was named after him, but naming after him meant my parents went to the rabbi, of course, and said, should we name him Hirsch, or should we give him like a proud Hebrew name, right? Because Yiddishism and all of that stuff, that's behind us. We're not going to act like that anymore. So, of course, the rabbi gave a profoundly rabbinic answer. And he said, if you're deciding between Hirsch and you're deciding between the Hebrew name of Tzvi, what should you do? Both. That's exactly right. Give them both. So now when I get called up to the Torah, I say, Harav, Natan, Tzvi, Hirsch, Ben. People have no idea how long this is going to go for whatever. So that's how, so I ended up with both. And we've carried it with us. And my grandparents had very strong opinions, and they never feared sharing them with us. And so that's why I kind of have a worldview that I do, is because they were not afraid to shape us from the earliest of age. My parents were not afraid. I don't come from a family that hides our feelings from one another. You bring us out into public and we behave very well, but in our own home, we're pretty open with what it is that we think about each other. And I think it's been healthy for me so far.
Thank you.
I got that off my chest.
Yeah. Yeah, you just keep laying down on the couch.
Amy, can you take some pictures of this so that my mom can see? That would make her really happy. Okay, thank you. Great.
Actually, you mentioned the part of the book, and I actually think it was a really powerful story. In Israel, Rabbi Lebovitz goes and tries to get an ID card, but not with Nolan, but with Natan. And he goes through this back and forth with the lady who doesn't really understand why, you want to change your name? Well, go to the embassy, right? So there's this, it's such a powerful moment, right? Because it's about what you're talking about around Jewish identity. And while she doesn't really understand where you're coming from, you really have this connection to your ancestry, but also what it represents. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that moment.
So I was awarded the Fulbright Scholarship for my dissertation. So I went to Bar Ilan University to study Hebrew Bible, which is like going to study baseball at Yankee Stadium. So I show up to Bar Ilan University, and before you get to meet the professors and before you actually are allowed to go into the library, you need an ID card, right? You need an ID. And sitting there in the reception of the International Student Department, which is how they process you, I present them all this paperwork, from my student visa to my acceptance letter from Bar Ilan to the Claremont letter verifying that the credits are going somewhere, so they shouldn't be kept, that everything should be sent through. All this information is given her, and then I recognize that this is going to be like the very first identification card that's ever produced for me in Israel. And I ask her, like, as she's typing in Hebrew, like she's asking me, she's just filling it out very, it's very administrative. It's like she's not putting any thought into this whatsoever. It dawns on me as I start seeing everybody else walk away with these cards. I say to her, could you do me a favor? Could you do me a favor? Could you stop typing? Please stop typing for 1 second. Could you do me a favor and can you just write in Hebrew? Because I see she's writing the whole thing in Hebrew. Instead of writing Nolan in Hebrew letters, write my Hebrew name, Natan. And she says to me, if you'd like to change your name, you can go to the United States Embassy and submit a name change. And I said, I don't want to change my name. I don't want to change the name on my passport. All I want to do is I want to use the Hebrew name that I was given. I was given an English name and a Hebrew name. And she said, why didn't your parents call you like your Hebrew name? And I was like, I don't know. They gave me an English name. I go by the English name, but I'm asking you to just please use the Hebrew name in this setting. And she said, well, if you want me to use a name that's different than your passport, you need to have your name changed. We go back and forth for like 10 or 15 minutes. And like most conversations I have with people whom I love in Israel, they just beat me over the head until I submit. And that's exactly what happened. She wrote Nolan Lebovitz in Hebrew letters. And that was my ID card, and it was not lost on me that it was a great sermon. It became a chapter in the book as well when I got back to LA. But I think that's part of the struggle, is that as proud Jews, if we really feel like we carry these two identities with us all the time, and I think that we do. I think that we all do. We carry two identities with us. Part of the fluidity of being an American Jew, of being both of those things at the same time, is that we value both, And so while, in the United States, I clearly am called Nolan by everybody who's known me for a long, long time, I really value the Natan about me. And I'd like for people to know me by that when I can, and especially if there would be a Hebrew identification used, I thought it was a good idea. But it was a pain in her neck, and so it didn't happen.
So let's go there to the dual identity, the dual loyalty. On Kol Nidre here, I lifted up that part of the book, and I talked about how you shared the story of the Reubenites and the Gadites, who are the ones that decided that they wanted to settle, not going across the Jordan into Eretz Yisrael, but they wanted to stay there, right? And you describe on the book, you go through the story from Bamidbar, how they made a deal that they could settle there as long as when the rest of Am Yisrael needed them, they would be there to fight them. And you raise up the principle of Kol Yisrael Arvim Zeh Bazeh, that all of Israel is responsible for one another, as something that speaks from this story, not just at that moment in the Torah, but to this moment, right? What does it look like for us to say that we will make that commitment to be shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand with Am Yisrael? And by Am Yisrael, I mean all of the people Israel. We are all Bnei Yisrael, but also specifically those in the land of Israel. And you lift this up, and I think it's a very powerful story to lift up that talks about this idea of dual loyalty. So talk to us, what do you mean by dual loyalty, which used to be a term which was used against us, like, oh, well, you're not truly an American because you have mixed loyalty to both the Jewish people and to America, but now you're sort of reclaiming that term in a really powerful way. So tell us what this term means and why it's important.
Right. So the title of the book is provocative. We knew that it was going to be provocative, and part of it was that it gave the book direction and teeth. I mean, if you think of Eliot's book next week, like For a Time Such as This, it's such a poetic, heavy, perfect New York rabbi title, right? And mine is provocative and cutting, and it's good for Los Angeles rabbis. It is an accusation that's been used against us basically since the time of the French Revolution. Okay, and if you study modernity and you study Enlightenment, the birth of the idea of emancipation for the Jewish people gave way to the charge of dual loyalty at the same time, right? How could Jews be good French citizens if we sit at our Passover table at our holiest moment inviting non-Jews to join us so they get to see that at the very end we say this very same sentence every year that we say next year in Jerusalem. I'm glad people in Denver say the same thing as in LA. Great. So that idea combined with the moment of possibility that was given to us by Napoleon and the Great Assembly, the French Sanhedrin is the way Jews call it. In Napoleon's terms from the French side, it's the Great Assembly of Jewish Notables is what they called it, led by Rabbi David Sinsheim. God should have mercy on him for what he had to go through. He had to lead 70 of the most famous Jewish rabbis and academics of that time. They had to sit in a room, and he had to produce a report. And if you think it's easy to attend a board meeting or a committee meeting, this was nearly impossible. But what gave way out of this, as the rabbis tried to navigate and claim that we could be both, is ultimately an idea from one of Napoleon's ministers that we could only be both if we came to the town square and we pledged loyalty to France. If Jews want to come out of the ghetto, we could come out of the ghetto if we in fact pledge loyalty to the nation state. So if you think that's at the beginning of the 19th century of French history, the end of the 19th century is the complete collapse of loyalty to France in the Dreyfus affair, right? That no matter how many times a Jewish Frenchman were to pledge loyalty to France, it's not going to work. We'll never be truly French in that way. So the reason I start here, when you say, I'm sure that's not where you thought I was going to start, is because one of the lessons of this book for me is that of all of the audiences I've spoken to, and most of the people in this room are already bought in, right? The reason you came is because this interests you, you're a member of a synagogue, you love Rabbi Shulman, you think that this program, that this arch of living in the Jewish 21st century is engaging, is interesting. You're already like part of the 10% that are fully bought into this, okay? The reason I start there is because as I go around and tour the country and talk about this, 19th century France and this paradigm is something that most American Jews have no familiarity with today. And I bring it up to explain that we're not the first generation of Jews to encounter challenge. And especially today, we shouldn't feel like we're without any kind of reference point. There's 1,000 reference points across our history to look at and say, what have we done right and what have we done wrong? So now let's fast forward from 19th century France to today and say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Well, leading up to October 7th, let's call it the before time, I traveled to Israel a bunch with all the different organizations that you mentioned, and we would get presentations from Israeli scholars, from politicians, from wherever, and the basic working assumption was Israeli Jews were on one track, American Jews were on another track. We were diverging away from one another in values, and ultimately, we were trying to figure out how a small percentage of each might maintain relationship with one another, how the vast majority of American Jews might even be able to relate to Israeli Jews in 10 years, 15 years' time. And by and large, the answer was birthright. By and large, and by the way, birthright is amazing. The chairman of Birthright is a member of our congregation. I have to contractually say Birthright is amazing. All of your kids should go on it, right? We should all support it. But Birthright is amazing, and it just goes to show that even if it's a constructed, produced experience, we have nothing to hide. I truly believe this, right? the answer to somebody walking down the street saying that Israel is a colonialist, apartheid, racist place is walk down the street in Tel Aviv. Not with me, go on your own. Walk down the beach in Tel Aviv. Tell me if you don't think that that's multicultural, if you don't think that that's free and liberal, if you don't think that's the rise of an indigenous people that's come back to reclaim what is rightfully theirs, if you don't think all those things are, then come back and have this conversation. But I have nothing to, you're welcome to go and explore as much as you want. So that was the before time. Then October 7th happened. I'm sure that my story of October 7th is not all that different than yours, is not all that different than Elliot's and every other conservative rabbi, in the sense that it was Shabbos, it was Simchas Torah coming up, it was Shmini Atzeret, it was all these things, and something different was happening, and we all understood. And in my own personal story, takes a slightly different tone in the sense that, you know, when we started checking on our phones to make sure that everybody was okay, on that Shabbos morning, all of our friends and family in Israel were okay. Everybody wrote back to us, thank God that they were okay, except for one family, right? Except Rachel and John Goldberg Poland wrote back to us. We got a very standardized message, as everyone did now, we understand, that they have not heard back from Hirsch. If anybody gets a text message from Hirsch on their phone, please let them know immediately. At that moment, we knew that something was wrong, right? We knew something was wrong. That began a journey, not only for myself, not only for my family, for all of VBS in terms of walking that experience with the Goldberg Polands. And I think all of American Jews walked that experience with the Goldberg Polands as well. And we all know that it ended tragically. But we woke up on October 7th. And by the way, I think one of the unspoken tragedies of October 7th was the amount of Jews, the population here of American Jews, who didn't have somebody to text or to WhatsApp on the morning of October 7th. Major failure in terms of Jewish institutional life. Every American Jew should have somebody in Israel that they are concerned about and have a relationship with, that they should be able to pick up their phone and send a text message or an email and say, I'm thinking of you. Well, if you had paid attention to all the research and all the presentations that I experienced in the previous year, 2 years, 3 years, you would think that we had drifted so far apart that the separation, the fracture was irreparable. But what happened on October 7th wasn't that at all. What happened on October 7th was we woke up and we decided to do everything that we possibly could as American Jews for our brothers and sisters in Israel. Right? I don't need to recap all of it for you. I don't know if this place became like, people came to VBS to say, my nephews are saying that their units have no knee pads, that they don't have the armed vests that they need. They don't. So let's raise money for armed vests and send armed vests, right? So we became, artillery, military paraphernalia procurement center. We became a funding source. We became the American Jewish community raised $1 billion. $1 billion, right? We stepped up and packed goods. I went to Israel for the first time in November of 2023. VBS went for the first time. Our first volunteer mission was in December 2023. We brought 24 people, and we stood at a center called Shokedah, which is right on the border with Gaza. My cell phone said, you've crossed into a war zone, please turn back. The Apple phone said that to me, and I believe the iPhone always, that's just my default position. I said to our tour guide, like, have we crossed into Gaza, into the war zone? He's like, in a very Israeli, he's like, no. The war, Gaza is officially there, right? So we stood at this center, and we made sandwiches, and we did laundry for soldiers as they brought their Humvees up, and we passed out drinks, and we passed out cigarettes, and we lit cigarettes, and we sat and talked with different people as they sat. And I have to tell you, I brought my 12-year-old son. I brought my 12-year-old son to stand there and do that. And my 12-year-old son hasn't ever made a sandwich for himself in his entire life.
He is a cute kid,
Okay,
though, Simon.
No, okay, but he stood there making tuna and shakshuka sandwiches. I hope to God that he made them separately, but he made these sandwiches and he handed them to soldiers. And I'm going to tell you a story that people outside of our people can't understand, outside of B'nai Israel can't understand. He handed a soldier a tuna sandwich and a Coke Zero. And the soldier, he was 12, he's a big 12, but he's 12, and the soldier was 18, 19, 20 years old. And the soldier put his hand on my son's shoulder and said, "I'm fighting for you." How does that make sense? How does that make sense? He lives in Israel. Israel was attacked in this border region. That's what we thought on October 7th. We thought Israel was attacked on its border region. We thought it was a regional war. We thought it was about the border. We thought it was the border communities. And it wasn't those things at all. It became a global war on so many different fronts. And for us, especially in LA, like UCLA became one of the fronts of the war. How does that make sense? The idea that the soldier from Israel going into Gaza looks at Angeles and says, "I'm fighting for you because we're in the war together," that should make sense to nobody in the world except for the people sitting in this room. And that's why sometimes we're watching the news and we say to ourselves, is this person nuts? And the answer is, no, we're nuts. We're special. Like, we are the only people in the world that would think that that would be possible. That Israeli kid and that LA kid would stand there for that moment and cause me to begin to cry in that moment. So what do I mean by dual loyalty? I mean that we already all have it, but we don't enunciate it out loud because we're conditioned by 2,000 years of diaspora to be ashamed of it. And it means that I have loyalty to the United States of America. I was raised so long ago that I actually recited the Pledge of Allegiance in a classroom growing up. And I don't have to think twice to know that those soldiers wearing Israeli uniforms are my brothers and sisters and that they're fighting for me, and I have to do everything possible to make sure that they win, full stop, exclamation point. Because if they don't win, they're but the tip of the iceberg, and it's coming for all of us as well. And we thought wrongly, just like we did on October 7th, thinking this was a border dispute, we thought wrongly, like when we saw these like protests erupt around the country, and let's not call them protests in this setting, let's call it what it is. They were pro-terror parades, walking down Fifth Avenue, walking down Westwood Boulevard, walking down, I'm sure there's a street in Denver, right? They're walking down the middle of our main urban settings, these pro-terror parades. We thought to ourselves, my God, what is going to happen 10, 20 years from now when these kids grow up and run for office? And we were totally mistaken because, as it turns out, 2 years is all that it took for one of these people to run for office and win. So the book is alarmingly outdated, having written it just last summer. And every rabbi, from Elliot to Ami Hirsch to whoever it is I speak to in New York, who tells me the story of them going into Mayor-elect Mamdani's office and saying, like, you can't believe it. He very much believes all the things that he said. Because we ourselves have a problem as a people, a Jewish people. We listen to people say things, and then we make apologetics for what it is that they're saying. We say, like, there's no way that they actually mean that. What they really mean is they want two states. We are in a place where time is moving very, very quickly. Time is moving very, very quickly, and we have to learn at a much faster clip than we've ever had before. And so what's shocking to me is that everybody in this room already displays the virtue of dual loyalty. But the title makes us uncomfortable because we don't want to see it written in the world in a very public place. it's time that we start teaching and saying out loud the things that we feel in our kishkis. Because the things that we feel in our kishkis is the true binding tie of our people. That's in the moments of crisis, that's what pulls us together. That's why we come to Kol Nidre. It's because something in our kishki tells us we should be there for Kol Nidre, but we don't have to be there for Shabbos. I don't know if you know this, but Rabbi Shulman and I are there for both, always. Okay? I don't know if you know that, but we're there for both. But in your kishkis, you know that there's something special that happens on Kol Nidre that doesn't happen on Shabbos morning. And generations and generations of Jews have believed the same thing. Well, I believe generations of Jews have believed this promise that was made between Moses and the diaspora. We're the latest to step up and say, we honor that same promise. When our brothers and sisters go to war in that land, we will be there for them. And we were. And now, and I don't want to jump to the end of the questions, but now, when you go to the World Zionist Congress as a delegate, you would not believe how the narrative has changed and how Israel and Israelis, I mean, before 2023, I'd never heard an Israeli say thank you before in my entire life, right? I didn't know that they could. I thought please and thank you was something that they didn't know how to do, that they weren't taught. And that's fine. That's the way that they were, and I love them for that. But now, we hear please and thank you almost over and over too much. It's worrisome to hear it this much because they feel so alone. And the only group of people that showed up for them in the entire world, was the group of people that sit in this room right now, and the group of people that's sitting in the room in Encino, and the group of people that are sitting in the room when I did the talk in Summerlin, Nevada, and when I did the talk in Bel Air, Texas, and when I did the talk in Highland Park, Texas, and when I did the talk in Highland Park, Illinois, and I can go around to all the shtetls that we build all around the country. We are the group that honors the promise that our ancestors made in the diaspora. So I'd like to think that dual loyalty is actually nothing new.
Thank you. Let's talk about spreading it. We had this young, wonderful, charismatic, articulate young person, Tessa Vexler, was here just recently from Santa Barbara. Yeah, and you just kind of want to bottle that up and like open it up and spread it on college campuses because she was so proudly Zionist and so so comfortable in her Jewish identity, but you and I both talked to so many parents who send their kids to college campuses, and it's a little nerve-wracking. What are they going to find? And for students, like how to show up. Not to mention that a lot of our college students going there aren't so proudly Zionist. There's a lot more nuance that's happening in that age group than almost any others. We know that a third of New York Jews voted for Mamdani. I haven't seen a statistic, but I would imagine that the percentage amongst young Jews was even higher. So I'm wondering about what have you found, you have a 16-year-old daughter who's going to be going to college soon, but what does it look like to really rebuild this pride in dual loyalty for young people and all people for the future?
So we were just to, because I like to share very private moments, but we were sitting with a college counselor, and she said to us, like, your daughter should really consider, like, not exclude the Ivy League. She obviously hadn't read my book. Not exclude the Ivy League, right? Because it's important that Jews keep going there, right? It's important that Jews keep going there, that we not run away from these places. So I said, would you send your daughter? She said, no, my daughter goes to Wisconsin. But you should think about sending your daughter. So everybody wants somebody else's kid to be the warrior, right? To be the warrior on campus. I'm not sending my kids to Harvard anytime soon. So let's start there to say every kid experiences college differently. After October 7th, that Thanksgiving, Shabbos, we invited all the college kids from VBS to come have lunch with me so I could hear what was actually happening on campus. So we have like, hundreds of kids that go to college, and 11 said yes. And people were so impressed that 11 kids decided to come have lunch with me, okay? So great, all right? So they're all home to see their friends, whatever. And these 11 kids took a couple hours out of their day to come tell the rabbi about what was going on. And it wasn't pretty. And it wasn't pretty. But what was apparent to me was each one of these kids had a very different perception of what was threatening. Right? So to one of them, it was perfectly understandable that their college told them that every day at this time in the afternoon, the terror parade comes down the quad. Just don't be in the quad at that time. And that was fine. They just weren't in the quad at that time. That was okay. And another student, Dafka, decided on their college campus, when they were told that that's when the parade was coming, that they had to stand there with an Israeli flag. And so different kids feel compelled to behave differently when they see different ideas, right? The student that was choked at Berkeley and assaulted a young woman, of course, no charges were pressed. She's a member of VBS, and her parents flew up to Berkeley hours after the incident. I'm sure like many of us would react to meet with the chancellor. And in the room, she said, I refuse to leave. I refuse to let these bigots define my college experience. Is that the right answer? Is it not the right answer? I don't know, but I've stopped judging. I've stopped judging. What I've realized is what's incumbent on me after listening to a lot of these kids talk about it is it's incumbent on me to support the procedures that are in place on these college campuses, even if they don't look exactly like the procedures that I would have dreamt up from the outset. What do I mean by that? A Chabad rabbi walked kids to their dorm rooms in Tulane University. If you didn't feel safe walking back, he or one of his sons would walk you back to your college dorm. Think about the bravery. Think about that. Think about the idea that the Hillel in Santa Barbara became a place where these Zionist speakers would come and give chizuk, give added strength to the college kids, and that Hillel at Santa Barbara was protected day and night. Amy and I talked about AEPI. It's in the book as well, in terms of an institution that seemed to carve out space on college campus in an unrelenting way. There were lots of bright spots on college campuses. Before we throw them all off, right? There were actual Jewish institutions that stepped up to the plate and said, we refuse to allow our kids to feel unsafe. Having said all that, the people who generally did not do that were college administrators. So we can all name the same handful of college administrators that have been welcomed by Dan Senor onto his podcast, right? They all should be given trees in Israel and be the righteous among the nations of the college administrators, right? So someday there'll be, the Vanderbilt tree in Jerusalem for everything, and they've made a name for themselves traveling around the country speaking about this. But we need to recognize that the college landscape has shifted. I mean, in a conversation that Elliot Cosgrove and I had online, where we both promoted our own books in a very unabashed way, we talked about how it's not lost on us the amount of students applying from Los Angeles and New York to UT Austin has suddenly become a Harvard caliber institution. Well, why? Why is UT Austin suddenly this shining beacon of academia when it wasn't just 4 or 5 years ago, perhaps? And the idea is that for Jewish students, they felt completely safe there the entire time. They felt like Jewish life not only survived, but thrived amidst all of the chaos. They saw an administration respond every time they made a request. And so I was talking to Amy about this in the car. It's difficult to talk about this based on data alone. It's also important to talk to the students themselves to hear their lived experience on these campuses and say, that our lived experience with NYU and President Mills was actually very positive outside of the fact that NYU has no campus. And so we had to walk through the streets of New York every single day, right? It's important to hear from our college students to say, that Vanderbilt and UT Austin and it's important to hear that USC somehow felt safer, UCLA felt less safe, and I'm not just saying that as an alma mater of USC, I'm saying that because data-wise, it's difficult to say there was less or more, or the encampment was smaller or bigger, or the protests or this or that. But all I can tell you is that the students walked away from one feeling like they were heard and their requests were responded to, and the other less so. And so I feel like going into this, the best ambassador for the college experience, which is one of the top 3 or 4 questions I get in my office today, are students from our communities speaking to one another in dialogue, saying, why don't you reach out to so-and-so? She's a sophomore on that campus, and she's had a wonderful experience. Or why don't you speak to so-and-so? She's a junior. She's had an atrocious experience, and she's transferring, so that they hear lived experiences. Because it's not enough anymore to go get a tour by the university and visit the Hillel and say, I have a picture of what that campus looks like. You really ought to speak to students who have to live it. And so I think that trusting other members of the Jewish people is actually important for us. It always has been. But actually I think to this generation, like the idea that they get their news from their peers, and they get their opinions from their peers, and they get their style from their peers, they get those stupid haircuts from their peers.
Or like the 6'7" thing.
That's right, they get a 6'7" from their peers.
My 4-year-old knows too.
They ought to also speak to their peers about the college experience, because I think they'll actually that'll be the opinion that they take to heart the most.
Tell us, how has the book been received, and what have you learned from your readers since it came out?
So the book's been received really, really well, thank God. I've done like 20 of these talks around the country that have spanned from rooms almost exactly like this, but of course entirely different. Like, this has nothing to do with what's going on in Summerlin, Nevada, other than the idea that everybody in this room looks alike and feels alike, and the room is almost identical, right? And in Encino, California, and in Florida, and in all these great areas of the country. But also, I spoke to the Idaho-Israel Alliance, which I didn't know existed, 700 people. I spoke to Christian groups. I came home from a conference in Miami a couple years ago, right after October 7th, where I felt like we were desperately alone. And a pastor got up there. His name was Reverend Johnny Moore, and he actually became the appointee to run the GHF, which was the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that distributed food. I don't know if anybody here saw him in the news. Anyways, he stood up in that moment at this kind of convocation of rabbis in Miami, in Turnberry, in a community totally different but exactly the same as this. And he said, you don't think I'm your friend, and you don't invite me into your communities, but when your kids want to march in pro-Israel marches on college campuses, my kids are going to show up and support them. And I am your friend. And we're not going to agree on everything, but we're going to agree on a lot of things. And I'm not trying to change your opinion, and you're not going to change my opinion on where we disagree, but it's time that you start acknowledging that you have more friends in this world than just yourselves. And I thought to myself, he's nuts. He's wrong, he's nuts. So I came home and I thought to myself, if that's true, then I could pick up the phone and call a pastor and he'd be my friend. So nervously, I dialed the phone and I called Bel Air Church, which is 2.5 miles away from VBS, up the street, up the hill. And I talked to the senior pastor. And the senior pastor said, Rabbi Lebovitz, we've never met each other in person. And I've heard that you're doing such a great job, blah, 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 great. And I said, Pastor Sams, could you do me a favor? Could you come down the hill and have coffee with me one day? He said, I'd be delighted to. What day? We made a date. So he showed up, and we built this like amazing little coffee shop in the front of our campus. We call it Bubby's, and we had a gourmet cup of coffee because we're pretentious Los Angeles people. And then we walked up the stairs to my office. I gave him a little tour of everything we've done in the campus since the last time he visited over 10 years ago. And he came up to my office, and I was working up the nervous energy to ask him the question. And so I finally got to the point where I said to him, you know, October 7th happened, and I didn't really hear from anybody in the community. Like, what have you been doing in your community that's either with the Jewish community or with Israel or not with Israel? And he said to me, Rabbi Nolan, at that point he was calling me Nolan, I'm so embarrassed. And I thought to myself, oh my God, it's true. I was right. We have no friends. And he said, I'm so embarrassed. Since October 7th, I didn't call. We've welcomed the Hostage Family Forum. We've only had 2 soldiers come and speak about the morality of the IDF. We had Patricia Heaton's group come, the pro-Israel evangelical group from Tennessee, come speak at our church at one of our largest services. And we had the Consul General from Israel, from Los Angeles, speak to us. And this was the spring, so this wasn't even like 8 months. He's like, so I'm sorry to say that we've only had those 6 or 7 events in our church, and over and over again we recite the prayer for the hostages. And I said to him, I want to apologize to you because I've been waiting for you to call, and I don't know if you know this, but the phone works both ways. And so VBS and Bel Air Church have become very close over the last 2 years. And believe it or not, when I don't know if you've heard, but there was a little bit of a fire incident in Los Angeles. And I got a phone call on a Shabbos morning as I was about to walk out the door. And it was the morning after the fires began. And I saw it was him, and I knew what he was calling about. I picked up the phone, and he said to me, we can't get to the building, and I'd like for the community to meet somewhere. Do you have any ideas? And I said, Drew, you got to be more Jewish than that. Just come out and ask me what you want to ask. I said, you don't even have to ask. The whole campus is yours. What do you want, tomorrow? So we've become much closer over the last 2 years. He used our space 3 weeks in a row. We welcomed Bel Air Church. We fed them every Sunday. I want to tell you something, first of all, because this you're not going to believe. Every Shabbos, we serve tuna for our kiddush at VBS, and I get a ton of suggestions/feedback about how to make the tuna better.
That sounds familiar.
Okay? I don't eat the tuna. I'm not a big tuna. I don't really care for it. But I can tell you that I know that in my job description, making the tuna or being responsible for the tuna is definitely not part of what I do. But I take all of the suggestions with a smile on my face, and we fed. I don't know how to turn this off. We fed 500 churchgoers each of those Sundays the same exact tuna.
And no complaints.
Not a single complaint. Not a single complaint. Now, I can go over so many of these stories about the difference between VBS and Bel Air Church. But my point is that as much as we're neighbors, we're strangers also. We act differently. Our 2 boards of directors went to the Nova exhibit together when it visited Los Angeles. We've tried to bring our communities close together. And as much as and this goes back to the reaction of the book, as much as some of the things that I wrote in the 3 pages that I wrote about how did we get here politically, I recap kind of the last 12 years, now let's say 14 years of the Trump, Biden, Trump, Obama years to explain that I think that's where all this mess began. I think that a lot of liberal readers of the book thought I was attacking one side. And I wasn't, because I criticized both sides mightily. But I think that there were certain readers, and some in VBS, that were hurt because they felt like I was stronger-headed in my criticism of President Obama than I was in other presidents. I think that part of this moment and the day after Mayor-elect Mamdani's results, I got a lot of emails from those same people that were hurt saying, you diagnosed the problem a year before. I think that I think it's really not virtuous for our people anymore to be devoted to either political camp. I don't see a lot of merit in it. And I talk about this at VBS all the time, right? There's no reason for the Jewish people to be devoted to the D or the R. We should be entirely devoted to J. So what that means is that we need to think about who is better for the Jewish people moving forward. I'm saying this at a moment where I just came back from the Z3 conference in Palo Alto, where I heard a speaker talk about how all of political science has taught us that political science is a horseshoe, where the very extremes come to meet each other, right? And if you look at the politics of Germany in the 20s and 30s, right, the communists and the Nazis, they fought head to head over and over, even though they agreed on a lot of the same issue, which was who they were going to murder, right? They fought on who was going to gain control. I don't actually think that this is a horseshoe at all anymore in this country. I think this is a donut that we're talking about. This is a complete donut. We are seeing the politics of this country completely go off the rails. And so whether you think you're watching a New York election or whether you're reading about what's going on at the Heritage Foundation, these people are fanatically apologetic about their anti-Semitism. By apologetic, I mean they explain it. They're not apologizing for it. They explain it. They explain it saying, well, I'm anti-Semitic just because the Jews control all the media and create all the problems for our foreign policy. They seem to be both in complete agreement on this one topic, that the problem with our foreign policy is mainly Israel. And I think that the Jewish people here in this country, American Jews, have a very specific obligation in this moment, and that is to lead this country back to a sane middle, where I actually believe the vast majority of this country lives still. When I travel around, I got to tell you, like, you don't experience America the way I experience America, most of you. I wear a kippah everywhere I go. Like, if I'm not wearing kippah, I was wearing the dog tag. For two years, I wore it every day. My son, we walk the Vegas Strip wearing a Team Israel baseball hat. My daughter with the yellow ribbon. And we're walking through all these things that you would think over the last 2 years we were inundated with anti-Semitic comments. It's not true at all. It's not true at all. One anti-Semitic comment in 2 years. The vast majority of people say to us, like, we stand with you, or what is that ribbon? What is that chain? We think it's like everybody is entirely consumed with the same stories that we're consumed with. The morning after the 20 hostages were released, thank God, the morning after the 20 hostages were released, Blair, my wife, went to Trader Joe's, which is a fantastic, fantastic chain that everybody should support. The CEO is a congregant of mine. And the teller, you know, everybody at Trader Joe's is supposed to be very friendly. They're trained to be friendly. And the teller asked my wife, like, oh, you look exhausted. Like, is everything okay? And my wife said, actually, I was up all night watching the hostage release. And she said, is that a new show on Netflix? And my wife became so irate that she called me from the car screaming. And she calls and screams at me a lot. I mean, I deserve it most of the time. But we think that the entire world is consumed with the same stories that we're consumed with. And it's not. It's really not. Everyone is consumed with their own kind of like way of going about it. And the very last thing I'll say about this issue about like how it's been received is a lot of our predecessors, let's put them in the group of our predecessors category, I think were hurt by some of the things I said in the book. So I was invited by lots of rabbis of our generation and maybe, let's say, 5 or 10 years on either side. But the criticism that if the pie chart of American Jewish education for the previous 30 years of education, if let's say the slice of Tikkun Olam was way too large, is what I'm saying in the book, that it has to be recalculated to an appropriate amount, and peoplehood needs to be taught now in a much larger slice, and peoplehood connections all over the world, primarily to our Israeli brothers and sisters. I think a lot of rabbis thought that in conjunction with me saying that I think that a lot of the interfaith relationships that we had constructed were somewhat fraudulent and purely aesthetic, because on October 7th, many of those same groups and allyships didn't show up for us. So I heard that criticism, and I left those meetings with people, and I went out and I began to forge those relationships. So that's why I'm proud to say that I'm on the board now of Pastor Dumasani Washington's IPSI organization, which is the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. And I'm going to Israel again next week. I just got back 2 weeks ago. I'm going again next week to travel with 10 black pastors through Israel. You'll be able to pick me out in the photos really easily. And because if we say that the Jewish people here in America need friends, then we ought to send our best representatives to make those friends. We ought to invest in those allyships right now, because it's hard for them to support Israel as well. Their people say to them, why in God's name would you be supporting Israel when all of our kids are on college campuses and the popular opinion is no longer that? You're putting the church in peril. And we need to show them that by supporting Israel, they're actually going to be rewarded in American society through friendships and organizational relationships, and there's benefit to that. So I've taken some of the criticism of the book and turned it into a challenge of sorts to say, if I think that, if I, just to name one, if I think that the relationship with Black Lives Matter for the Jewish community was fraught with problem from the beginning, but we didn't actually address it because we believed so profoundly in the mission of standing with the black community, as we should have. But we didn't say this organization is highly problematic. Why would we ever associate ourselves with this organization? Now we need to find organizations that we want to raise up in its stead, because we can't live on an island. We can't live on an island. We have to have friends. And so we have to make those friendships and say to our kids, when you go out in the world, these are the organizations that stand for relationship with the Jewish people. And because the urge that you have to be friends with lots and lots of different people amongst our neighbors is actually the right one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's really interesting given where you are situated. So Rabbi Lebovitz is a senior rabbi in a long line of powerful senior rabbis. Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who many of you know, is currently there as pseudo-rabbi emeritus. Right. And but before that was Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who founded Jewish World Watch, which is a huge Tikkun Olam slice.
Huge Tikkun Olam slice.
So that's really interesting that you're,
that's right.
You're kind of re-envisioning the work. In many ways, you guys are addressing the same problems, but through a different lens.
Right. So the blessing of VBS is that they're not only fine, they encourage me to write and be provocative and be a thought leader. And the challenge of VBS is that a lot of that thought challenges the Jewish institutional life of the 1970s and 80s that led us in a direction that I think October 7th comes to call into question on many levels. And I think that just like Rabbi Schulweis was blessed to have VBS because it supported his ideas entirely, I enjoy very much the same blessing. So it's been very interesting, especially behind closed doors with many of the members of VBS who were very close to Rabbi Schulweis and still feel very close to him.
Yeah. Well, and I think that those two perspectives really manifest itself not just in your synagogue, although we're happy to continue the therapy session about it, but even more importantly, across the American Jewish landscape. Because, you know, when I talk to young Jewish people who are not as supportive of Israel, they're usually coming from values that led to these Tikkun Olam-based institutions that are about empathy, about supporting the stranger, about compassion, all things that are from the same Torah that we read on Shabbat as well. But it's different hierarchy of values, right?
So,
and you know, you're emphasizing the particularism, and they're emphasizing the universalism in terms of what we do with these values. And we're in an age where we're obviously seeing more and more polarization between the Jewish community. So I think there's a lot to this idea of where 21st century Judaism lies is bridging those two lines of thought. Neither are right or wrong. They're both important, but they're also different, right? And, you know, one of the things I think about is worrying that we're going to have Zionist synagogues and non-Zionist synagogues as, you know, the future. I don't want that world. I think the big tent where we can all show up, even those who voted for Mamdani or would have if he was here in Denver, I think it is important to engage in dialogue and to engage and to welcome people across demographics. As you know, everyone comes from a place, not to say I agree with you, but to ask questions and come from a place of curiosity. I don't think we want to push our young progressive or just progressive people away. I think it is important to engage with them, but a lot of those people are the ones that, you know, founded Jewish World Watch, which obviously has done important things. You know, I think we've gotten to a point where it's hard for us to even talk to each other, right? You're shunned if you belong to AIPAC. You're shunned if you belong to J Street. It's just a matter of who's shunning you, and that's doesn't seem like the Jewish community that we're hoping to build bridges with.
So, I agree with you entirely. My next article coming out in Tablet Magazine is about the collapse of Orthodox conservative and reform and the rise of Zionism and anti-Zionist congregations. So you can invite me back for your next talk, and we'll have that conversation. The reason I think that, and the reason I think that you're right in the sense that there's an inherent danger, I actually think it's both. It's a mixed bag, just like I think that the denominations were a mixed bag. Is I don't know anybody who like graduates college and goes to live, it's actually New York, both of these instances that I referenced in the article, and say to me like, I feel very compelled to daven with a Sim Shalom Siddur. What synagogue can I find a Sim Shalom Siddur? That's not what young people ask me. Young people ask me like, this is my association with Israel. Where can I find a rabbi that's going to reflect those ideas? The idea that they are searching for voices that are pro-Israel or anti-Israel, I think reflects a gravitational pull that's not entirely different. I think the Jewish people's always been, the map of the Jewish people has always been laid out around charismatic rabbinic messages. I think when you say to yourself, why did that synagogue succeed and why did that synagogue fail? Well, you can always say location and the community and whatever, but I'm willing to bet that like synagogues that have succeeded have generally been led by rabbis that have been really well accepted and their messages resonated with that community, helped inspire that community in some way. I think that we see that very much today, and just the topic that's going to carry us forward, the topic of the day that's going to carry us forward, I think, for the next several years, if not into the entire next chapter of American Judaism, because of both what's happening inside of our people and what's happening in the political circumstance around our people, is going to be this question of how out of the closet should Jews be in public spaces? How supportive of Israel must we be in public spaces? How associated with one another can we be? And I think that that's all going to manifest into kind of this highly divisive, like you're saying, divisive scenario. And I hope and pray that the level-headed, rational, intelligent, articulate, wise rabbis succeed, of which I think we have one here on the dais. And I think that as these kinds of messages spread around the country, I think you're going to see, I don't know, I'm willing to bet this synagogue is going up in membership over the last couple of years, right? So on the morning of October 7th, I took the bima and I said, we are going to stand in solidarity with Israel. That's going to bother some of the members of this community as we move forward and Israel starts to make mistakes. And it's going to attract people as well. We're not going to lose our compass like through the news stories that start to emerge. And our membership has gone up quite a bit. So I think that we're going to start to see Jews actually participate in the surge. The surge is not going to end because of October 7th, because there's going to be continued pressure forcing Jews to affiliate in a safe space. And so I think that that's good news for synagogue life. If there is a voice in that synagogue life that knows what to do in terms of teaching and stewarding that people that shows up in the right direction, in a healthy direction.
Yeah. You know, we've had people come over to HEA since October 7th because they feel more at home here,
Right.
because they can feel like they can be proudly Zionist here.
Right.
And we had Rabbi Danny Schiff was here last week. He talked about, he feels like even though there are places like our synagogues where membership continues to rise, the movements themselves are crashing towards, that are no longer relevant. And he talked more in the lens of the digital age, but it was really about what Americans need Judaism for.
Right, no, and I think the denominations will crash. And I think that's why conversations like this are so crucial, is because in the end of the day, VBS and HEA know that they're in the same boat. We know
like three-letter acronyms.
That's right. And that's important that we know that there are other like-minded synagogues around us. And I think that the future of Judaism is actually, I walked past it and just noted it, didn't think I was going to talk about it today, but like if you look at that stand over there, there's an accumulation of books that I assume are used by people that walk into the synagogue, right? I don't think it's like a Hefker stand that people should take on their way out, take home. But nobody has books at home. All that people do is come bring books to the synagogue and say, we don't need this library anymore. Can you do something with it? Because nobody wants books. But on that stand, you see conservative Sidurim, you see Orthodox Sidurim, you see Orthodox Chumashim, conservative Chumashim. You see a kind of mixture of all kinds of different philosophies. And I don't think that anybody comes to synagogue to associate with a particular prayer book anymore. I actually think that my kids are much better off being able to open any prayer book and find their place in it. And I think that all of our kids go to college, and most of them end up in Chabad anyway. So they come back to synagogue life much more comfortable in different settings than we were, or perhaps even than my parents were. And I think that that's part of the changing nature of American Judaism. And I think that it's probably for the better that they feel comfortable in lots of different settings rather than just one.
And tell us, I'm curious about, we all bring our own backgrounds into our work. So I'm curious how being a filmmaker shapes the way you view the Jewish world, what you think is working in institutions, what you think the future will be. How does that color the way that you look at the Jewish work that needs to be done?
So my quick answer to when people come to me and say, wow, you came from the entertainment industry, and now you're a rabbi. It must be so different, right? And so my real quick answer now is I say, well, not really. Like in Hollywood, I spent my days going from room to room in meetings with lots of Jews who thought they knew everything about everything. And now in synagogue life, I spend my days going from room to room in meetings with Jews who think they know everything about everything. Okay, so that gets a good laugh. I think what Hollywood teaches, so first of all, when I started rabbinical school, I was married, just like Sarah. I had 2 children. I just had my second. So I was not included in like the guys going out for drinks after school or like what would happen at parties and things.
He would do his homework like between the hours of like 12 a.m. and 2 a.m.
Right, when
because he
kids
would
would
put
wake
the
up.
kids to bed.
Right, when
and,
kids would wake up.
You know, that it was,
I'd put them
I remember
back to
that.
bed reading like Chumash out loud, practicing with them. The kids would fall asleep. And I think that my kids, that was a taught behavior because in the synagogue today, my kids still fall asleep during Torah reading. So my kids are great. They're the punchline of a lot of different stories. But what Hollywood taught me Hollywood taught me to be a good storyteller. Okay? Hollywood taught me that we can teach text until Mashiach comes. I spent 5 years studying Talmud like Sarah, and I haven't had that many congregants walk into my office and say to me, like, I'm really stuck on Baba Metzia 56b, okay? Hasn't happened yet, hasn't happened. But occasionally, more than occasionally, congregants want a good story. They want a good story that teaches them a lesson. As it turns out, I was trained in an industry that trained me to tell good stories that have a lesson at the end. One of the lessons of Hollywood is, and this is one of the challenges of Hollywood is as well. If you think about Hollywood, no institution of Hollywood that was created 100 years ago still exists in the same manner today. But if you think about American Jewish life, there are a lot of institutions that were created 100 years ago that still exist in the same manner today. And a lot of the boards of those institutions feel responsible to protect the institution rather than serving the needs of the Jewish people. And as we see attendance in rabbinical school just completely bottom out, as we see anti-Semitism rise all around us without a sufficient answer, as we see a lot of these things happen, it will call upon us to question whether or not these institutions still serve our purpose. If you pay attention to what just happened in New York in terms of the election, the chairman of the ADL came out immediately saying they're ready for a response. Well, a lot of that, and a lot of his personal pivot, Jonathan Greenblatt, a lot of his personal pivot since October 7th that he's caught flack for is trying to make an American institution that many of us feel like is important, trying to make it relevant in this moment. And I think that compulsion to try to make institutions of a century ago feel relevant in this moment without considering how the digital age affects it, right? How perhaps theaters will no longer serve its purpose when people can buy 90-inch televisions and stream movies day and date from your living room, that perhaps we should start letting go of theaters. Or perhaps, with the rise of Netflix, nobody ever imagined that Netflix would start buying studios. Netflix would become so powerful that it'd start buying studios. Nobody would imagine. I think that that's something for all of us to internalize, in the sense that institutions have a purpose in their time, and then oftentimes, if they can't change with the times, they will become extinct. American Jews really have a hard time letting go of those institutions. And I think that the pivot is really important. That's the second lesson. So stories and inspiring people through stories is, I think, something that Hollywood instilled in me. But also from a distance now, seeing that none of those institutions exist in the same manner, I think is a lesson that the Jewish world should take. I don't know that we will.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open it up to a few audience questions. Just a reminder, a question begins with whatever you want it to and ends with a question mark. So you can think about what questions you might have. Right, exactly. Right. Tell us what keeps you up at night and what gives you hope at this moment.
Such a great way to end a question and answer. I'm going to probably steal that from you. What keeps me up at night is the same thing that keeps you up at night. Like, will my kids enjoy the same American Jewish experience that I did? I have to admit that I don't have the answer to that today. We love traveling around the country. My kids said, if you get to see Rocky Stadium or you get to see Mile High, take a picture in front. Because we travel around to all the different ballparks. We're a big baseball family. And so we've been to 11 ballparks so far. And I got to tell you that if you want to wonder what we care about, all you have to do is this trip that we're participating in, and you'll see the great cathedrals that we've spent money on as a country. We care about our sports a great deal, all right? And I think that there's a deeper reason because of it, because I cross paths with people from different socioeconomic status, different ethnic backgrounds, different whatever. When you sit down in a baseball park, we're all together. And it's one of the last places in this country where I feel like the beauty of America exists, the national anthem, all the wonderful aspects of this country exist there in a really meaningful way. I don't know if that'll exist. I think the Dodgers are one of the best parts of Los Angeles, and you know, there used to be a Jewish Community Day at Dodger Stadium. There hasn't been since October 7th. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, a bunch of the Dodgers got together and decided to put a cross on the mound in his memory for a week. I'm personally not offended by that. My kids immediately came to me to ask me what I thought of that. I thought it was like them sitting Shiva. There's a lot of very ultra-Orthodox Haredi evangelical Dodgers, whether it be Clayton Kershaw or Freddie Freeman, or there's a whole bunch of them, and they thought that that was important for them, and the Dodgers honored that. The Dodgers have always been good to everybody. I think that right now we sit in this moment where, like, where do we go from here? Where do all of us go from here, right? Is there going to be a New York Jewish community parade? The mayor has attended the New York Jewish community parade. The Israel parade is what they call it. There's every year. There's never been a mayor that hasn't come. What are we going to see this year? These are the questions that we're all going to be glued to as a community, and it doesn't just keep me up at night because I personally don't think, I don't know how, and this would be a great question for Elliot, not that I want to put words in your mouth, I don't know how the Jewish community of New York should respond were Mayor-elect Mamdani show up. Right, so like it becomes a very complicated dance for the New York Jewish community. So I don't know that one way is better than the other. All that I'm saying is that we're going to start seeing things unfold over the next couple of years. And New York wasn't the first community to go through this. Chicago went through it. I talk about Chicago in the book, and Mayor Johnson wearing a keffiyeh into City Hall right after October 7th. Nobody was paying attention because Chicago is Chicago and New York is New York. And that's the reason why Chicagoans grow up with a chip on our shoulder. But this is going to happen all around the country. The same type of challenge to the Jewish community is going to happen all around the country. So, and it's not just going to come from there, by the way. Like, the Heritage Foundation, Tucker Carlson, all these people, they're very close with Vice President Vance. They're very close, and so, if you want to know what keeps me up at night is that 10 years from now, we're all going to sit around and be like, President Trump was so normal. Do you remember President Trump? It was so normal because people from my community come to me now and say, President Bush W is such a mensch. Like he was such a mensch, right? Do you remember the days of W? He was such a mensch. And I think to myself, like, I can look at your Facebook and like, I remember you calling him Hitler, like before, like years ago. So like, we're in this place where like everything in the rearview mirror looks more normal than what we're going through. So what keeps me up at night is that 10 years from now, you and I might be sitting on a stage somewhere and it would be far more dire. What gives me great hope is us. Is this community and communities just like this one, seeing that the surge has occurred, seeing, I actually, since I spend a lot of time in high school now, it's not only my kids' high school, it's others as well, because if I speak at D. Toledo, then Milken invites me, and then if I, and I spend time with private high schools and their Jewish affinity groups. I actually think that that we were shell-shocked as a community after October 7th. We were not prepared for our college kids to face that. They were not raised to think that they would ever have to face that. The Jewish community was not prepared to support them. It was a mistake on every level. We were not prepared to walk into university presidents' offices and say, fix this right now. We didn't know how to tell the president of the United States, like, we expect you to start pulling levers. Now that the president has, it's difficult to say, like, we don't like those levers that you've pulled. They make us uncomfortable. They make us extremely uncomfortable. I think that the next group of high school students that are going to go to college, I think college should be prepared. They're coming in with the right tools. They know what they're getting themselves into. They're selecting colleges. Their introductions to university life is very different. Hillels, Chabads, all of it has changed in a certain way. So I think that what gives me hope is the strength and the resilience of the Jewish people. And I think that we have pivoted and met challenges for thousands of years. We will pivot and meet this challenge as well. It might take us a moment to figure it out. We might have to give birth to new groups. Sarah and I might join new rabbinic associations. I just invited her into, without her knowing. We might find our synagogues shedding denominational affiliations, making new affiliations. And I think that in the end of that, we will be stronger for the willingness and the openness and the strength and conviction and bravery to meet the challenges of tomorrow, because I think we've always been a hopeful people, and it's always worked out for us.
Let's give a big round of applause for Rabbi Dr. Lebovitz. And let's take a few questions. Yeah, Martin.
Just by the way, I was actually in Israel writing a blog on October 7th, my wife and I. We didn't know what was going on in Egypt. Anyway, my question is, I'm curious about your perspective why so many Jews, especially the young ones, but they're also older ones, who are so critical of Israel, so sympathetic of the Palestinians, like the innocent Gazans, what's going on? Where do these people come from, and why do you think that so many of them now that they are so critical of Israel?
Right. So I think a whole generation of American Jews have been raised knowing one Israel with one government and one prime minister that they feel is problematic according to their value set. Okay? And having said all of that, I had the great honor of sitting with him 2 years ago, and I'm entirely convinced that he's not going anywhere. He's pretty good at running for office. I don't know if people have noticed. He's been in that office for a long, long time, and when I've met other Israeli politicians, it's difficult to walk out of any of their offices and say, wow, that's the guy that's going to inspire the entire Jewish people to forgo a prime minister that's been in office for 20 years. So I think that they come reluctant to the table of saying that they support Israel, and so you hear all this qualification business. I support the people of Israel, not the government of Israel. I support the this, I support the that. I think that there's a way to be blunt about it with them, And there's work to be done on our side at the same time, right? So I think they have to grow up faster about the Jewish topics than they do about other topics. And so I sat in a room with lots of young people who explained to me, this was before October 7th, about how they'd been lied to through their Jewish education, right? How they learned all of Jewish history and they never knew about the Nakba. Never. Nobody ever sat them down and explained to them what happened to the Palestinians in 1947, who weren't called Palestinians then because we were called Palestinians, but this group of people came together and decided that they were going to take the word, and they should have it. And they said, what do you think? Like, don't you think that education should change? Like, how would you call how would you call us, our claim? And I said to them, like, I think that your claim is completely hypocritical. I think you are hypocrites. I think it's difficult for me to believe that students that go in that group, Harvard and Yale and Cornell and all these prestigious East Coast schools, who grew up learning about the American Revolution, did it not dawn on you that Americans killed lots and lots of British people? Did it not dawn on you that Americans killed lots and lots of natives as well? Because you know that story because it's taught to you even before the real Thanksgiving. My kids learn the anti-Thanksgiving story before the Thanksgiving story, right? They don't learn the fable that I learned. They learn the reality first. And so for them to believe that we were somehow gifted this land and who we fought against, the idea that nobody had to be pushed out in order for a Jewish state to suddenly be established, it's just foolish and childish. The idea that they had to grow up in an article is problematic. Having said all of that, so that they have to grow up and understand where the world is right now. Having said all of that, we don't do a good job of attaching them to Israel either. So let's be honest with what we do, right? We say to them, I want you to love this place. I want you to love this place, and I want you to do it the same exact way that I was raised to do it, even though I wouldn't send you to a school that educates you with the same pedagogy of the 1980s and 90s, the pedagogy I was raised on, because that's outdated and archaic, right? I wouldn't send you to a school that makes you sit down with a pen and paper and write like that because that's outdated and archaic. I wouldn't want you any of these things because it's all outdated and archaic. But when I want you to fall in love with Israel, I want you to fall in love with 1985 Israel. And that is impossible. That's impossible. And so they have to be exposed to their peer group in Israel. Right? So they will not believe from me, and they will definitely not believe from you, what it is that we think about Gaza until Israeli soldiers of their own age group visit college campuses and say to them, I walked through thousands of apartments in Gaza, and there was not one without armament, Hamas flags, Mein Kampf in Arabic, Hitler posters. There was not one. There was not one that I didn't find guns underneath the children's crib. There was not one that I didn't find a tunnel. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've been to Israel 8 times since October 7th. This is what I hear from soldiers over and over again. They come out, and these aren't ultra-right soldiers. These are soldiers that went in, and think about this. Think about the idea that we go through Yad Vashem. When you walk through Yad Vashem, the first thing that you see when you walk in Yad Vashem is the righteous among the nations, the trees that have been planted, right? And we take great pride in the idea. I mean, my grandparents thought they never encountered anybody like that. We could have that conversation, but there are, let's say, hundreds of trees, a couple hundred trees, for a population of a continent of 40 million people, right? We found those hundreds of trees. They find themselves now because of the perks, but those trees are there. In all of the stories about the hostages, right, of which I've met several, and I've read the accounts of almost all of them, there is but one questionable account of a Palestinian bringing a hostage an extra piece of bread. There are accounts of, many accounts of hostages not being in tunnels at all, being chained to radiators in people's apartments, right? Being held by lay people, quote unquote innocents. We're holding them. You could come in and pay them to sexually assault a Jewish girl that was chained to a radiator, touch her, do whatever it is you want to her. That's how the family made money. These are the horror stories that we are not sharing that have to be shared in terms of what happened. So it is incumbent on the Jewish community here, to bring those stories to the young people, to face them with these accounts, these personal accounts, because we know now that they watch the news and they don't care, and they don't really believe it. But when they see in a personal account that somebody has gone through this very traumatic, they believe it. They believe it, because that's what the digital world has done for them, right? Is that influencers on Instagram carry more credence than Brian Williams or Anderson Cooper or Jake Tapper or Brett Baer, depending on who it is your flavor, right? So the idea that that is something that we know research-wise, but we don't apply it to Israel, is just dumb on our parts. And we're smarter than that. We're smarter than that. So the idea that, like, I thought it was brilliant. I have to think if it was last night. It was 2 nights ago. I was in Palo Alto, and John and Rachel Goldberg-Polin were there, and they spent a half hour in Q&A with the plenary, and then they went and they spent an hour with the teens. There were 500 teens at the conference, okay? So those kids have to be armed with the truth. And they have to be armed with they have to experience the greatest teachers that we have in our people, right? And if Israel wants that to happen, they have to send over those representatives as well, and we have to make it possible because they're not cheap. They're not cheap, right? They all come with a price tag of travel and everything else. And I'll just give you an experience, just a brief story. After October 7th, we brought Gil Troy to our community, who's a friend of mine. He came and he lectured, and he received rousing applause in Shabbos service, which always makes me uncomfortable because I don't always get those rousing applause. But okay, Gil Troy. So then he did another service and another service. Everywhere he was super well received. On Sunday, we paid for a high school program. Any high schooler that wanted to come see him could come see him to sit for 90 minutes to learn the story of Israel. We had 14 students show up. And I thought to myself, like, at the beginning, I thought, this is disastrous. Our people is in so much trouble, we have no idea. Because 2 of the students were my kids. But then Gil began by asking a very simple question. How many people have ever learned Israel's story from beginning to end? Not a single hand went up. Not the Ramah kids, not the day school kids, not the kids attending community school. Gil started with the Enlightenment, Theodor Herzl, the Chalutzim, the Jewish Agency in Ben Gurion, Menachem Begin, the wars. Then he pivoted to explain he's not going to just do wars, he's going to do accomplishments. What was it like growing up in Israel in the 60s and the 70s? Why were the 80s? Why did it turn better? Startup nation. What has Israel invented? All this stuff leading. At the very end, he said to them, who had ever heard a story like this? And the kid raised his hand and said, we've never sat in a lecture. Then I thought to myself, like, do you understand how different it is? Like, they've never been trained to sit for 90 minutes. That's totally outside of their comfort zone. And so, like, we have to begin to rethink how we package all of this. Because even the kids who want to come, like, by the end, I was so encouraged that 14 kids walked out of VBS knowing the story. Those were 14 kids that didn't know the story before. They knew bits and pieces. They could raise their hand. They knew David Ben-Gurion. Some of them knew Theodor Herzl. None of them had ever read the whole time. So we don't do a good job of actually teaching it either. And so a lot of that is in the book in the sense that we have to take ownership of the failure. When we look at the kids out there and say, we don't like that they're voting that way, we don't like their perspective, we don't like their associations, we have to think to ourselves, what about their childhood led to them making this decision? What didn't they find out? How do we do it better? I think we can do it better. I really do.
Yeah, over here.
Hi, thank you for coming. Great speech, great interview. Mentioning the TikToks and the YouTube, are there any Jewish influencers? That's what I'm looking for. Are there any Jewish influencers, younger influencers, and/or are there organizations like 12 Tribe Films or anybody you know in Hollywood that are backing to get that out there? Because that's a great solution to get TikTok influencers.
Right. So in the book, I talk about Eyal Levy. I don't know how many people in the room follow him, right? He started a group called the Israel Citizens Brigade. Okay, we're out of a studio in Tel Aviv. He was the spokesperson for the government. That's right. Before he said something negative about Sarah Netanyahu, and he was immediately fired. He was immediately fired. So he started something called the Israel Citizens Brigade, and to me, this is the most hopeful idea. The idea that young people can come to him and use his studio to create different programs that all get disseminated through social media. He raised hundreds of thousands of dollars the first week that he announced this from American philanthropy. Because I think we're so hungry for new ideas and for different ideas. There are a lot of, I was with Lizzie Savetsky in Jerusalem. She was at the World Zionist Congress. I was with Shabbos Kestenbaum, now lives in Los Angeles. There are a lot of young, brilliant voices who are out there. Some of them are more right, some of them are more left, some of them are more feminist, some of them more traditional. And I think that's all wonderful. Because that way each of our kids can try to find somebody who's. My daughter is an intern with Stand With Us. She does the fellowship, the high school fellowship. And she went for a 2-day retreat, which was amazing. I looked at the program, and she came out and I said, what was the best part? And she said to me, she met this influencer by the name of Charlotte. Anybody know her last name? Thank you, Charlotte Korczak, that was it. USC. So Charlotte Korczak, to her, that was the best part. College professors, the consul general, Israeli IDF officers, decorated IDF officers, all that stuff. Charlotte Korczak was the highlight. So we need to start internalizing and that these things matter. Like, I don't know who any of these people are, and then over the last 2 years, I've familiarized myself with all these people. So if Charlotte Korczak is the person who matters to my daughter, Charlotte Korczak is the person that my wife and I support in her endeavors because she clearly speaks to that group. But it's a great question.
Yeah. Elena, yeah.
Because we're paranoid. Because we're paranoid and because we've traveled through this entire diaspora experience and we've been hurt in each one. It's like the result of an abused spouse who's been through 100 abusive relationships. And now we're at the tail end. I'm in Dodger Stadium and somebody's called up to the plate and Mexican flags go up. And I don't ever think to myself to turn to any of those people at Dodger Stadium and say to them, how dare you put up a Mexican flag? I don't even think that. And I think that in today, in 2025, we all recognize that we all walk around with multiple layers to our identity. Right? I never walk up to anybody and say like, you should not be so proud to be a woman. You should not be so proud that you're gay. You should not be so proud that you're X, Y, and Z. When it comes to being a Zionist or holding up a flag for Israel, I think that we are conditioned to feel like uncomfortable. I think AIPAC is villainized where other groups are, and I think that's anti-Semitism. Right. No, I think this close to Boulder, I don't have to explain to you the danger of walking for Israel or being a part of it. But I can tell you that that's a problem, right? Right. For a long time. No, because I think we're the only people accused of it. We're the only people accused of it, right? So Tucker Carlson doesn't bring on people from the Mexican community, the Mexican American community, and say to them, like, don't you think that Mexico is actually at the core of all of our foreign policy problems? Don't you think that Mexican Americans should have to declare themselves foreign agents of the government, like you did with Senator Cruz? Right? So I think that, like, if you had told me that Senator Cruz would be the great defender of the Jewish people, I would think, like, he's a articulate, smart guy. I've heard him speak many times, but I would not think that our future safety would rely on him defending us to not need to be registered as foreign agents. That was, to me, one of the most bothersome interviews I've ever watched. And I feel like part of the problem is that immediately AIPAC began releasing emails to address, like, that it was not what it had been accused of being. Of course, that's the natural thing. That's the natural response. But that's the very Jewish response, to say, no, you're saying that we have dual loyalty. We don't have dual loyalty. We very much are fit within the American mainstream. And I think that we have to condition ourselves to come out and say, Tucker Carlson is an absolute bigot, and the people that he associates himself with must also be bigots, because they all agree on these host of issues. And so we will do everything in our power to make their lives difficult. And when people like Ben Shapiro disassociate themselves from the Heritage Foundation and step up and say, being Jewish is more important than me being a fellow at the Heritage Foundation, they should be rewarded by Jewish conservatives and liberals alike. And when Jewish liberals, like Ezra Klein, when he sits in relationship with Ben Shapiro and says that his Jewish identity is important, he should be rewarded. Because I think that both of these people are being rejected by the crazies of the fringe at this point. And they're saying, they're both feeling pressured. And that's why suddenly you see this interview between the two of them happening, where they sit at a table and they're closer on many issues than they are farther apart. Because I think as Jews, we sit much more centered and rational than some of our political pundits would like us to believe.
Yeah.
During the rise of the Nazis in Germany, German Jews felt comfortable. They said, we're Germans, nothing is going to happen to us. Do you see some parallels to the U.S. right now, and does it worry?
Yes, it worries me. In the book, I talk about Amos Salan's book, The Pity of It All. If you've not read The Pity of It All, I highly encourage you. I talk about my book references a lot of books that I've read in the last few years. So The Pity of It All is about basically how German Jews were so comfortable in the previous, I forget if it's 50 or 75 years leading up to 1939, that intermarriage in Berlin reached 70%. That's how comfortable they felt. Okay? So when we think to ourselves, like, there's no comparable scenario to American Judaism. This golden age is totally unique. Yeah, it's unique, and it's exactly like all other golden ages. So we can learn from it because we're postmoderns and we understand history, especially as Jews. History tends to repeat itself. I mean, we're still talking about Egyptian slavery to this day. So it behooves us to go back and just say, how is it similar? How is it different? Now, I think I face this more than anybody, because I think people love to come to me because they know of the family that I was raised in and say, don't you think this is exactly like, enter the year, 1933, 1938, Germany? So first of all, number one, I think if it was 1938 Germany, I think people don't understand what 1938 Germany was like if they compare this to 1938 Germany. Is this 1933, 1932, 1925? It's sad to me that that Germany in the 30s is the only reference point that American Jews have, which is why I go out of my way in the book to talk about Spain in the 14th century and England in the 13th century and talk about France in the 19th century and and America in the 18th century. I mean, we don't even think that the French Revolution occurred and the question of whether Jews should be citizens was asked publicly, and the entire Jewish people thought that Napoleon might be the Mashiach. There had just been a revolution across the pond here. President Washington never asked if Jews should be citizens. We were all just always baked into the cake of the DNA of this country. So if you say to me, like, well, what makes this country different? I go down a whole long list of American exceptional attributes to say Judaism in America flourishes for a whole different set of reasons than it does in other places, mostly because we've always been part of America. The very founding of America included Jews. In my synagogue, I say this often, all American Jews are either Woody Allen Jews or Mel Brooks Jews, every single one. I'll explain to you very simply, right? Woody Allen Jews believe that we're always going to be like outside of the country club, dying to get into the club, but really we're always outsiders at the club. And if you like Annie Hall, right? That everybody at the table turns around and looks at us and we're always wearing, a black hat and payas in their eyes. Mel Brooks believes that American Jews are so profoundly American that even the Native Americans speak Yiddish. Do you remember that in Blazing Saddles? So when you say, like, what did I learn in filmmaking? This is like what I learned in filmmaking. I very much am a Mel Brooks Jew, very much a Mel Brooks Jew. Part of that was like on every field trip to downtown Chicago from the suburbs, you would stop at the President Washington with his arm around Chaim Solomon statue in downtown Chicago, which, by the way, was defaced many times since October 7th, and shown to us with a sense of pride. It is worrisome, and that's why I don't think that the group of Jews that voted for Mayor-elect Mamdani, people say to me, well, do they have a point? Like, should we be learning something from this? It should be taken with a grain of salt because Jews voted for Hitler, right? They weren't right. These Jews aren't right. Like, right and wrong is different than who people vote for. People vote for a whole host of reasons. And in this country, we only get two choices. So it's not like either one of them is a tzaddik, ever. We're picking between two different, and usually it's what is the least bad choice of these two different people, right? So, but I do think that one of the lessons is I don't think the German Jewish community ever imagined the next chapter, right? They thought that was going to last forever. And I go from community to community, and I hear from people all the time, well, I think American Judaism is going to survive, and my wife and I just invested in an apartment in Baca, so like we've got it covered either way, okay? Or name the shtetl in Israel of American Jews where people go, Renana, Herzliya, North Tel Aviv. I think it would be foolish to say that American Judaism is going to disappear. American Judaism is not going to disappear anytime soon. Not in the next 2 years, not in the next 6 years, not in the next 10 years. And we need to understand that the next chapter is not going to be like this chapter. So how are we going to be ready for the next chapter is the whole point of my book, right? There's a new chapter of history that's begun. It began in the morning of October 7th. It didn't just begin for Israel. It began for us here. Things changed. How are we going to meet those challenges moving forward? German Jews had no answer. They had no answer. Time and again, till the morning that the decorated German soldiers were escorted out of their homes by the Gestapo and put on train cars. They believed that Germany was going to come to its senses. Germany never came to its senses. So all I'm doing is traveling around the country saying, everyone, I'm like raising a flag. There are problems out there. There are lots of problems. We need to come together and assert ourselves differently than we have in the past, because this isn't Skokie of 1979 anymore. This isn't even Charlottesville. This isn't Pittsburgh, Tree of Life. This is, and I could go, this isn't, Poway. We're in a totally different era, and we have to realize we're facing an entirely different chapter of history.
I think we should stop there because some people need to say Lila Tov. Let's give a big round of applause to our friend Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz. He'll be out in the lobby. If you have a book if you'd like to buy, he has a couple copies. If you have a book you brought, you'd like him to sign it. If you'd just like to ask him another question or tell him what a nice Jewish boy he is, he'll be available. Thank you everyone for coming tonight and for our sponsors for this program. Yeah, nice job. That was awesome. Yeah, great. Yes, you have to buy it though.
No kidding.
It's $20.